Thank you so much for coming down, Craig or Nick. What do you prefer at this point, I guess?
You can either one, Damien. I will answer to either one.
Okay, absolutely. Well, I guess what led you, having had a career that's a lot of, I'm sure was hard fought for as a literary novelist to kind of enter this world of more graphic, violently graphic horror?
That's a good question. I think primarily it's like I never felt that. I think some people think there's sort of like a Harry Potter scenario when you become a writer.
Mm-hmm.
You put on the sorting hat and it mumbles away, literary writer, and so you have to go and sit at that table and just be a literary writer for your entire career. If you wanted to do that, that's fine, and there's plenty of people that I know who I really like and admire who just want to write literary novels. But I've always thought of my skills, whatever they are, it's sort of like a carpenter. Like I have my trade, my skills, and they're kind of universal. So if I want to write a literary novel, then I can go do that. But if I have an idea or a blueprint that kind of pushes me towards something that is more clearly genre, in this case horror, I have no problem. In fact, I'm really excited to go and embrace all the trappings of that genre and write like a straight ahead, fiery horror novel, which is sort of is I wouldn't even say it's liberating, because that's almost to say like
The other one's constraining.
right. Yeah,
I guess.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. No. So I really enjoy having the opportunity, and I grew up as a horror writer. My biggest influence is and probably will forever be Stephen King. So it was just a wicked opportunity to sort of write horror books.
Well, we'll come back to Stephen King in a second, but why then the pseudonym? What necessitated you having a pseudonym at that point?
Well, that really, and I hate to throw my agent under the bus, but I've done it a few times and he doesn't mind anymore, but it really wasn't my decision. It was sort of in the publishing world, there might be a sense of like that readers don't maybe have an elasticity of how they could they possibly believe that this person writes this kind of fiction, but he or she also writes this kind of fiction. To them, I think they feel that it's better just to sort of separate the camps, I guess you would say.
Well, you said like that readers don't expect Alice Munro to write gory horror books.
Right. And I mean, certainly my own stuff that I've written under Craig Davidson is nothing like Alice Munro. And I think if you were to open up, say a page of Nick Cutter's work and a page of Craig's work, they are similar. Like, I mean, I dealt with pretty graphic and intense and visceral scenes and sort of sentiments on both sides of that divide. But yeah, it was really my agent's idea and this sense of needing to sort of separate the camps. But as as soon as we made that decision, I've done everything in the ensuing years to make sure that it's known that I am Nick Cutter.
Well, then why Nick Cutter? If you can pick it, that's the thing is you could pick your name and you have the choice of any name in the world. Nick Cutter is a pretty awesome name for a horror writer.
Right. Well, that was one of the most enjoyable parts of the whole scenario, is that Nick is our son's name. And whether he's going to grow up to feel that it's really be happy with that honorific we've bestowed on him.
You're talking to someone whose parents named him Damien in the late 70s
from The Omen.
when The Omen's coming out. So
they had some kind of sense, some precognition.
I feel sorry for you, poor Nick. Anyway, sorry.
And then Cutter, I mean, that was sort of just like my agent said, well, horror writers have these really punchy names, like King, Rice, and Kuntz. And so we, Chopper, Slasher, Bloodletter. Ultimately, it was settled that Nick Cutter seemed to have the punch that we were looking for.
You've said that you've had to keep it a secret for some time. Was it hard keeping something like that a secret, especially when your first novel as Nick Cutter starts getting all this praise?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think not only was it hard to for that reason, because really, when you look at like pseudonyms, a lot of writers who have used pseudonyms, ultimately it comes out that they are this other person. And I think partially it's them letting the cat out of the bag because they're really proud of that work that they did. And I am as proud of The Troop or The Deep as I am of anything that I've written under as Craig Davidson. So yeah, there was sort of this sense of like, I don't want it to be a secret for any number of reasons. And also because I have lots of friends who are genre horror writers. And the last thing I would want them to think is that I'm sort of trying to sweep that aspect of my writing personality under the rug.
Well, you mentioned other writers having pseudonyms, so I guess to go to the historical pseudonym, Stephen King with Randy Bachman writing under that name for a couple novels. Sorry, is it Randy
Richard.
Bachman. Randy Bachman's
Bachman
from
Turner Overdrive.
PTO.
Right, yeah.
I got rock and roll on the brain.
I think though he did. That's part of how he came up with that
Really?
pseudonym is using Randy Bachman as because there's all sorts of stories behind where the pseudonyms come from, and I do think that was part of it for Stephen
Well, I
King.
know he's a huge music fan because I recently heard a story about him being obsessed with this really obscure punk band from Ohio called the Meatmen. He used to go to their shows and buy their records. And anyway, but we digress. So, but back to the historical pseudonym.
Right.
And picking a pseudonym, were you influenced by other writers having pseudonyms? Did that make it feel okay? Like I'm putting myself in this canon of great pseudonym writers?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, I think I was perfectly happy to do it. Because another part of it too is like I have a family, I have a mortgage, I have sort of the day-to-day exigencies of anyone who has a job, and if the people who are sort of helping you on your way in this job, the people backgrounding you suggest that a pseudonym is the way to go, and you trust these people, you sort of you go with them and you trust their judgment on that. And but also, yeah, there's plenty of writers who have written under pseudonyms. And as I said, there are probably plenty out there who we don't know are pseudonyms, but there are plenty like Robert Galbraith we now know is J.K. Rowling, and obviously Bachman, as you said, and several others. Like, I mean, there's one UK writer Ian Banks, who wrote The Wasp Factory. And so when he writes science fiction, he just goes as Ian M. Banks. So everybody knows, you know,
Not
right?
very well covered of it.
Right.
It's like Superman with Clark Kent glasses
on. We were going to
on.
go with like Craig Z. Davidson.
Yeah. Hiding in plain sight.
That's right. That's right.
Do you write differently when you're writing as Nick Cutter as opposed to Craig?
Well, yeah, Damien, that's a good question. I think I probably do to a certain degree. I think sometimes with literary writing there's this sense, and I probably fell under it as well, is that to write great literature, you have to, throw yourself around the room and access these deep parts of yourself and weep into the carpet and, sort of come up and dredge up these most deep suffering parts of yourself and sort of lay them on the page. So like if you haven't suffered and really sort of given deeply of yourself for that art, then it's not art in the first place. And I don't actually agree with that. And I think what I started writing for, and maybe you started making music for, is like it gave me joy. It was just a lot of fun. I like getting up but the idea of a writer in some circles getting up and making a cup of coffee and skipping off to the writing room in like a joyous state would seem like, well, you're not going to be creating anything of value. You're going to just be.
Where's the toil?
Yeah,
where's the
exactly.
turmoil?
Where's the drudgery of it all?
Yeah.
So I guess in some ways I really enjoy writing horror, and that's not to say I bring anything less to it or give anything less of myself to it, but I think there's a modicum of deep enjoyment that I get that I don't always get from literary writing.
When you sit down in front of a blank page to start something, is there any sort of prep you'd go into differently depending on what you're going to write, or do you even know at that point what's going to come out?
Yeah, no, I don't. I know a lot of writers work off outlines, or everybody's style is unique to them. I certainly have an idea. It doesn't matter what I'm working on, and I might have certain scenes that I'm really excited to get to, and I feel like these are going to sort of be instrumental scenes in the fabric of the book. But it's a lot more like loose, like a jam session sort of a thing. But I do try, I'm dedicated to it. I try and write like 1,000 words a day. I don't let myself leave the writing room until I've got 1,000 words. And sometimes if it's flowing well, I'm done by noon. And other times, my fiance is coming to me at 11 o'clock at night. Like the muse is just being very fickle tonight, honey.
Creativity serves no clock.
That's right, exactly. And so sometimes I'm a ghost, and other times I'm it's just an easier day.
Is it weird that you had to go to all this work to kind of hide the fact that you were expressing creativity in a different way? It's almost like people need you to compartmentalize creativity. Yeah,
I think there is that too, and I mean, am I angry? No, not really. There's so much worse to be upset about and to be concerned about, and I mean, if there is a little bit of snobbishness in literary circles, well, there's snobbishness everywhere in music circles. I'm probably a bit of a beer snob. You know what I mean? I'll drink a Bud, but do I prefer? You know what I mean? So
I thought you were going to say a beard snob there. I thought that's what you said. And I'm like looking at your beard, which is impressive. But I'm like, sir, you are in the presence of a very bushy beard, but beer
nice
snob.
Beard. Yeah,
beer. I will totally give you a beer snob.
Yeah, or food snobs, and it's like we
yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
so if that exists, there's way worse stuff to concern oneself about than that, and I can happily kind of just work within it, because it doesn't really affect my day to day anyways.
Well, it's almost like there's a comfort in that elitism that people find, to kind of exclude.
Exactly. And again, we all probably have our own little moments where we're also exclusive in our own ways too.
Well, The Deep is about a global plague, and it looks at environmental destruction. Why did you find horror was, why did you actually use the horror, I guess, in this case, to engage sort of a very serious topic?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think with anything, any sort of creative endeavor, you look at the world around you and the things that are concerning to you, and I think horror especially. We have a 2-year-old, and so now the thought is always
I have one too.
Right. Okay. So what is the world we're leaving for our progeny, and The Deep in many ways is a grappling with that, and a grappling just of simply, well, as you would know too, like at the age that I was writing this, and he was like 1.5, and it's like there's a big scene in the book where there's always the fear of this child toppling down the basement stairs, and this becomes like a really galvanizing fear for me. Like I started to think that our basement door was just opening of its own accord and kind of gravitationally pulling our son towards it. But it's funny how fears are different for different people, because my editor is in New York and he lives in an apartment, and a lot of people do. So he's like, what is the big fear of these steps? It's like, well, if you lived in a house and you had a child that age, you might feel a little more you might feel that a little more seriously. So this book was a lot of ways me grappling with the idea of being a new father and what we're leaving for our sons and daughters, and taking a horrific look at it.
I've always found when I had my first child and now with my second child, it changed the way I engaged with violent horror. Did you find it changed your sensitivities at all or sensibilities?
Oh, that's a good question. As the idea of like, what age would I want him to read, say, the Nick Cutter books?
I don't even that. I mean, just even on a personal level, like with the engagement of loss of life and all those sorts of things.
It's weird though, and you would think maybe, and a lot of people would soften. In some ways, I've gotten more hard, and maybe it's the intensification of my own fears and worries and concerns, and that sort of expressing itself in deeper moments of. But every book's its own thing, and the first 2 Cutter books have been definitely pretty visceral. But the third and fourth ones are already written, and they're significantly less of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think as I get older, you're right. There is a softening, and that's just something that most human beings have to accept as part of their aging process.
You're dealing with a guy who's softening in a swear word band, so I can very much relate.
That's right. It's going to be you're going to be doing like Barry Manilow type tunes in a while.
A lot of cuddles on our next tour, I think.
Right.
A lot of the critics that knock horror and knock genre fiction in general knock it because they say it's formulaic with plots and characters. Do you find the formula liberating to embrace with, or to sort of dance with, I guess?
Yeah, I do. I think like people who read, say, horror or maybe detective fiction or some of these genres, like there is that sort of warm, fuzzy coat feeling of like I'm slipping on something that I sort of know the trappings of, and I can identify with them. And then for a writer, it becomes the fun comes, how do we tweak those? Mm-hmm. How do we play with the already established tropes that people do like, and sort of the moral universe that horror occupies? But how do we give them something new? Because no, I don't think any creative individual just wants to sort of travel ground that has already been traveled before in exactly the same way it's already been traveled. You just enjoy the works that have already done that. So yeah, for me, it's always about adding a new gloss, something different, something that to me is unique to my perspective.
Well, you mentioned at the top of the interview, your child literary hero, Stephen King.
Yes. And
Stephen King has called your work old school horror at its best. How validating is that to have your childhood hero kind of reach out and
well, enormous. And you've probably had the same thing in your career. For me, it was, I'm just sitting on the couch and it comes through, it pops up on the email and you read it and you're just baffled, sort of that someone that your hero has even read something that you have written and didn't think that it was totally inconsequential. And he's incredibly generous. So it would be the same thing if your musical idol shows up at one of your shows and then comes backstage afterwards and says, that was a hell of a show, Damien.
Because I can relate to this on a certain level. Is it, obviously the praise coming from peers and critics, Giller Prize, obviously, like winning these literary prizes is a huge thing. At the end of the day, if it's just you, Nick Cutter on the couch, or Craig on the couch, is it the literary prizes, or is it that acknowledgement from a childhood hero that really?
That's a great question. For me, it's just like having a career. Whatever helps me perpetuate my career and do the thing that I love to do, that I can get up every morning and do it, and help my family, meet my obligations. So they both feel great. They're both incredibly validating in different ways. But because writing, and I'm sure music and all sorts of creative endeavors, there's a huge amount of like, am I doing the right thing? Am I, you sort of need that validation sometimes, and it feels so honoring when it does come.
Well, thank you so much for coming in and talking to me. I really appreciate it. Nick, Craig, whichever you prefer.
Thanks, Damien. I do appreciate it.